Welcome, Daniel Nation, to our monthly podcast, The Daniel Report. We are glad to have everybody back on our podcast this month. And tonight, I've got an awesome guest for everybody. I've got Mr. Brett Rogers, author of the book, The Goal is to Win. And tonight, we're going to be talking about campaign strategy. We're going to be talking about how you can win as a grassroots candidate running for state representative or even local office. And we're going to be talking about an upcoming workshop that we're doing in Frisco together on August the 16th. Really excited about this. And so, Brett, welcome to the Daniel Report. We're glad to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it. And just got to say, watching everything that you're doing, you're making a difference. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. So for those of you that don't know Brett that well, he does work with Joanne Fleming from Grassroots America, We the People. And Brett is the guy that does the magic behind the scenes with House of Bad Cards and Grassroots Priorities. And I want to start off by talking about the House of Bad Cards. Brett, what is your takeaway from the 89th legislature?
So somewhere around here, I actually have a deck. I must have moved it. But anyway, my takeaway from the 89th legislature, if I could put it in a sentence, is that Texas Republicans have forgotten how to limit government. That's the big takeaway. They voted for all kinds of huge, expansive things, everything from the Hollywood to the biggest budget ever in Texas, to having all kinds of subsidies giving out. Anyway, it's just ridiculous. And so you see good people like Brian Harrison, David Lowe, Mike Olcott, all of them voting against all of that spending. And then you see other people who are voting almost 100% of the time yes on anything that comes to the floor for a vote. And that's only a recipe for bigger government, more taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in our last episode, we had Representative Shelley Luther, David Lowe, and Mitch Little were my guests. And we talked about the Rice University rankings, which had just come out.
Yep.
And all those guys were, of course, in the top 20. Do you think this batch of new freshmen pushed the needle further to the conservative right?
Well, without question. So in the last session, we had the House of Bad Cards, and 16 of the cards were replaced, right? That's about a third of the deck. Once that happens and you start to cleanse the barrel, so to speak, you get rid of the bad stuff and it pours out and all that fresh water goes up. Well, then all of a sudden, all the bad stuff continues to rise. And so one of the things you'll notice is some of the people who were on the House of Bad Cards last time, they're on the deck this time, but they're higher in the deck, meaning that they performed worse, so to speak. And part of that is because our conservative freshmen, they voted the right way on so many things, and they voted to limit government in so many ways that it just makes the other folks look terrible by example.
Yeah, so in essence, these guys that have come back to the district, session after session saying, hey, we're in the top 10 most conservative, and this was the most conservative session ever. We're seeing those guys now in the 30s and 40s on that Rice University ranking.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And so Rice University does a good job. They don't really reveal their metric on how they do that. We actually reveal on House of Bad Cards the math that goes into it, how we calculate the whole thing. And literally it's math. It's a spreadsheet that I have once we have all the data. Then there's a spreadsheet that I have where we use certain things like the budget vote, the Hollywood vote, things like that to kind of ding them. And if they vote for those things that no Republican should ever vote for, then they climb higher in the deck of cards, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, I know you guys are updating the House of Bad Cards for the 89th session. Do you want to whet our appetite with who the Joker might be this time?
Well, last time it was Dade Phelan, the speaker. You might find it could be another speaker this time.
And I want to talk about the speaker because how do you rank the speaker whenever the speaker doesn't take any votes?
Yeah, true. And I'll just tell you one thing that I have on there. Gene Wu gave an interview to Spectrum News. And when he did, he talked about what the committees were doing, Democrats on the committees, because, of course, we being the Texas Republicans, we had a legislative priority that said no Democrat chairs. And I was actually on the committee. I was part of the Legislative Priorities Committee. And so when we had the vote for that, that was easy. We didn't want that. Even though we thought we had that covered, we didn't think that that would be a thing this time. Anyway, what they did was they played games with it. They came out with subcommittees and chairs for the subcommittees and things like that. And then every vice chair for every committee in the House was a Democrat. Well, if you then take a look at how they felt about it, how the Democrats, the chairman of the Democrat caucus in the House is Gene Wu. And when Gene Wu had his interview with Spectrum News, he said, man, we've got more power than we've ever had. Well, if you're giving power to the Democrats, maybe the Republican leadership should have understood that no Democrat chairs was really just another way of saying don't give power to Democrats. But that's what they did, because they went with the literal interpretation of it and then said, what? We didn't give power to Democrats. We didn't put them in Democrat chairs. So yeah, they played games with it.
And why do the Democrats need more power? Mary Gonzalez, who's one of the most powerful Democrats on the Appropriations Committee, she was the one that point of order Dr. Alverson's gender mod bill to death in the 88th. And then in this session, she got rid of all the Republicans' amendments to the budget in one fell motion, one fell swoop.
Yep.
And if she has that much power already, why do we need to empower them with more power?
Well, that's only because there was an agreement. Of course, the only reason that Dustin Burrows became Speaker was because 49 Democrats voted along with 36 Republicans to get him there, right? And that was a minority of the Republicans who were in the House. So anyway, when it's the majority Democrats that get you there, you're going to go ahead and move by the government or by the Democrat rules.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Well, hey, I want to jump into your book. The Goal is to Win. And I know there's a lot of people watching this podcast that are thinking about running for office in the next cycle. And so I want to whet their appetite for this awesome workshop that you're going to be doing for us in August. Let's talk about your first chapter in the book. The definition of a revolution is 51%. And, when you talk to Republican voters and precinct chairs, they always bemoan the fact that voter turnout is oh so low. And we can't get new voters to come into, the base and vote with us. But in your book, you have a different viewpoint on that. What's your viewpoint on the existing electorate?
I love low voter turnout. I think low voter turnout's awesome. If 3 people vote in an election, how many of those do I need in order to win? 2, right? So low voter turnout is simply, first of all, we shouldn't force people to vote if they don't want to vote, right? So we shouldn't make it easier for ignorant and stupid people to vote. If people don't understand, they don't know the candidates, they're just going with whatever the TV tells them to do, they shouldn't be a part of it because they don't really understand what they're doing and the policies that hurt us. So with low voter turnout, you give me a low voter turnout, that means I only need to reach a lower number of people to get to the 51%. So no matter what election it is, all I need is 50 plus 1%, and then I'm in.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. You made a statement on page 11. You said, stop fighting for more people to vote. Fight instead to reach out and inform more people to vote for your candidate who will shrink government. It's a great statement.
Well, and one of the things that I tell people in the seminar is that everything that we know and love in this life, God spoke into being, right? Well, who's made in God's image? We are. So how powerful is our mouth if we use it to speak the truth to people, right? I believe that one day that we're going to be held accountable for the words that we use in this life. And so the best thing I can do is obey, and the best thing I can do is tell the truth. And so therefore, if I get out and I actually talk to people, what a difference that would make. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, we had a front porch. Today we have a back deck and a privacy fence. We don't really know our neighbors. And so this is a great opportunity for us to just get out, talk to the neighbors, talk to our coworkers, talk to those that we know, because many of them think like we do. We just haven't had the conversation with them. So why not do it?
Yeah. And you've got a quote in your book, and I can't quote it exactly, but you talk about how basically speech is the lowest form of advertising. So use it.
Yeah, it's the most trusted form of advertising for sure. And one of the things that I say is talk is cheap. That's what you're talking about.
Yep.
Talk is cheap. So do a lot of it. Right. It doesn't cost a campaign a dime. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that quote. Okay, so let's talk about chapter 3, multiplying your vote. You say in your book that you just going to the polls by yourself is not multiplying your vote. How do you multiply your vote when going to the polls?
Well, so in 2008 and 2009, 2008 and 2012, for every 9 Republicans that went to the polls, had they brought a 10th Republican with them, just one more, we wouldn't know who President Barack Obama or President Joe Biden are because they wouldn't have been elected. Our problem on our side of the aisle, on our side of the spectrum, is that we don't organize. We don't bring people with us. Typically, we go and we vote alone. But if I ask you who's more likely to bring a busload of voters to the polls on election day, you would tell me? Democrats, and everybody in the audience does when I ask them that question. So, but why isn't it us? So if we just talk to people, if we just get one more person and say, hey, the primary is coming up, let's go ahead and get, over to the vote, over to the polls and vote. If we're able to do that, then we're able to double our vote legally, not bring dead people. And that allows us then to be able to win the election. And so not a lot of people vote in the primary. Again, that's great. So my job then is to just bring one more, or maybe 5 more. And if we're able to do that, then we can overwhelm every election with the right candidate.
Yeah, I mean, if every Republican voter would just bring one neighbor to the polls, you would win the primary handily.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about chapter 5 in your book. He says that the most worthless phrase in politics is vote them out. And, when I talk to Republican voters all the time, they always moan and begroan how terrible the incumbent is and that the goal is let's get rid of them. But you teach a different mindset when trying to win. What is your mindset?
Well, the most notable thing about that is that none of the above, vote them out, is never on the ballot, right? So you're already giving people an instruction to do something that doesn't exist. But further, every time I say somebody's name in a campaign, the hardest part of every campaign is name recognition. So why plug the incumbent who already has enough name recognition? We don't want them to have more. Instead of vote them out, or instead of none of the above or whatever, why not promote the person who's running and have that person have their name recognition expanded and known throughout the district? So a lot of what I do in a campaign is I really just kind of forget the incumbent so much and focus initially. Later you talk about the incumbent, but initially you get the name of the person out there who's right and who's going to do the right thing, and you get their name out there.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great way to go about that. You make a statement in your book. You said no one left Egypt because Moses stood up with a sign one day that read, "Egypt is awful." They followed Moses because he told them about a land of milk and honey. And you talk about you've got to give voters the land of milk and honey. What are you talking about when you say that?
So really the best example, the most famous example of the land of milk and honey is what Trump did. His land of milk and honey was called MAGA. And he said, if you follow me, I'm going to take you to energy independence and secure borders and a stronger economy and manufacturing back in the USA. And so as he gave these things, and people went, wow, that sounds a lot better than where we are with this Biden thing. So let's go do that. And so people who were Democrats, like Joe Rogan, even Elon Musk, people who had voted Democrat in the past said, this sounds a lot better. And so they voted there, but that's because he promised them things. Well, a lot of people, when they run for office, they haven't really thought of what they're going to do for the voter. They instead think, oh, the other guy's terrible, vote for me. And they think they have to give you their resume. Well, we don't need their resume. We need to know what they're going to do for the voter, because that's what the voter's ultimately interested in.
Yeah, agreed. I was meeting with a group of potential voters last night from my precinct, and I made the very statement. I had a copy of your book and I held it up and I said, hey, we can't go out there and just go beat up the incumbent. We got to give the voters in our House district a vision of the land of milk and honey. And one of my precinct chairs said, well, what is your vision of the land of milk and honey? And it's a good thing I've been reading your book, because I had an answer for him. And I said, well, my vision of land and milk and honey for our House district is actually getting a real reform speaker elected for the first time in Texas history and prioritizing conservative legislation over Democrat. To me, that's milk and honey,
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Right?
Yeah, for sure. And the thing is that when you go out there and you, when you talk about the negative things that the opponent has done, the incumbent has done, some people get turned off if there's a lot of that. You still need to do that. I mean, when Donald Trump got up there and talked about MAGA, he also talked about how bad the Harris-Biden administration was and how bad they would be if they continued to go forward. It's okay to talk about that, but twice as much as you talk about your opponent, you need to talk about what you're going to do. And so I'm glad you had the right answer for that. And that's what that's what attracts them to the campaign. No person who's selling a Dodge vehicle has a commercial that says Ford's terrible, right? Don't buy a Ford. Instead, every Dodge commercial or whatever car manufacturer they have, you see this beautiful sunrise and you see the panning around the car and showing the smiling driver, right? Well, that's what we all need to do as candidates, is we need to show them what the experience is to get in the car that we're going to drive and where we're going to go with that car. And then people feel good about that.
Yeah, I love it, man. Great advertising there. Let's talk about chapter 6 here, finding and funding the challengers. This seems to be the hardest thing for our party to do. Is how do we find a challenger to go up against these incumbents?
So most of the biggest hurdle, by far the biggest hurdle to getting a good candidate to step forward is that they believe, and they're not wrong about this because historically they're correct, they believe they'll have to do it all by themselves. They believe that they're going to step forward, they're going to have to use a lot of their own money, they're going to spend all their own time, and then they wonder where the volunteers and the donors are. And I worked with candidate after candidate after candidate who said, man, I called all my friends and I found out that about a third of them were my friends and the rest weren't, right? And so anyway, that's kind of how it goes. What we need to do is we need to flip that around. It's not the person who is a plumber or a teacher or an engineer. It's not their job to suddenly become an expert fundraiser overnight. That's a ridiculous idea. One of the things I say in the seminar is a solution is what works. If what we're doing isn't working, then it's not a solution. We should stop that. Well, I can't think of anything more that we do in campaigns that is not a solution than expect the novice to step forward and become an expert fundraiser overnight and raise tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's just ridiculous. But instead, what if each one of us, just like we pay our phone and our water and our electric bill every month, what if we just set aside money and put it in what we call the Freedom Fund or a Patriot Jar, or something like that? So my wife and I, we set aside $100 every month. Just today, Steve Toth recently jumped into the race to run against Dan Crenshaw. First thing I did was take $100 out of that fund that we have because the money's just sitting there, and I gave that $100 to Steve Toth. And so I did that because I believe in Steve. He's going to do a great job. The more that we're ready to help a campaign and the more we communicate to people that we're organized to help a campaign, the more likely we are to get the right candidate to step forward who doesn't believe that they'll have to do it all by themselves.
Yeah, and I love your idea about getting 350 people to each give you $35 a month to hit that $100,000 first benchmark that you've really got to hit in a state rep race, which will then snowball the bigger donations. So I like how you approach that.
Yeah, if you set aside money on a monthly basis, even if it's just $25 a month, that's $300 a year. And if 350 people in a county, and it's not hard to find 350 patriots in a county. If you get 350 people to do that and save up that money, that's $105,000. And so anyway, we can do this. We just have to organize and prepare.
Yeah, agreed. I want to talk to you about defining the candidate. You make a statement in here about the goal is to define yourself before the opponent can define you and to define your opponent before they can define themselves. How do you accomplish that?
So a lot of incumbents already have some definition of who they are in the district, but like House of Bad Cards, what we did with House of Bad Cards, and when I say we, I mean me and Grassroots America, what we did with that was we wanted to take all of the highlights, things that Republicans should never do. Like the most egregious thing I can think of that the whole audience always agrees with, in the last legislative session, there were a lot of Republicans who voted for a mileage tax in Texas. That basically would have a device in your car that would track every mile you go and make every mile you go a toll road effectively. And so we already have a mileage tax, so to speak. We pay it at the gas pump, but we protect our privacy through doing that, right? Nobody knows where we drive. So anyway, this would get rid of that completely. Well, nobody in Texas, I don't care if they're Democrat either, nobody really wants this. But we had Republicans who voted for that. So the moment that I tell somebody, by the way, your incumbent, your Republican voted for the mileage tax, you just reset the definition for who that person is. And suddenly they go, oh, why would they do that? I wouldn't vote for that. And suddenly you're creating a chasm between them and the voter where that person isn't representing them. That person is now distant from them because of the way that they voted. And that's how you start redefining the people. And as far as defining yourself, you do that through consistency. So a lot of candidates who jump into a race, they haven't really thought through the issues and their answers to the issues. They just tell people, hey, I'm thinking about running. Well, the moment that happens, the rumor mill gets going. People start calling them. They now have to give answers on the fly. And I give a great example of that, where that happened in Maybank, Texas, where I was working in a seminar and a guy who was thinking about running, he hadn't committed yet, was there. A fellow walked in and said, are you guys having a meeting about politics? Because I see one of you got a Trump hat on. And we said, and anyway, we said, yes, we are. And one of the guys said, hey, that guy's going to run for office. Bam. The guy who walked in started asking streaming questions at that guy right away. hey, what are you going to do about this? And how do you feel about that? And anyway, the guy who wasn't even committed yet to run looked at me like, what do I do with this? So I had to bail him out. But that's the point, though, is that candidates aren't ready for the onslaught of things that are going to come their way. They have to prepare to do that. And you're best able to do that if you take the time to actually go through these things and think these things out first.
Yeah. And you also say in your book, don't announce your candidacy until your website and your push cards are ready, right? Because you want to have a well-oiled machine ready to go, right?
Yeah, because if your marketing materials aren't ready and people say, oh, you're running for office, where's your website? It's under development. You got your push cards? We're working on that. Well, do you have a slogan? We're playing with a couple of things, right? Then suddenly nobody believes you anymore. You don't sound like you're really ready for this. And why are you talking about it?
Yeah, exactly. You kind of become irrelevant really fast, man.
Yeah.
You also make a comment on page 53. People are attracted to a leader. They're attracted to a truth teller, someone that will relentlessly fight the battle for them, and they're attracted to someone who wants to free them. How do you draw a contrast between the challenger and the incumbent whenever the incumbent is out there saying the exact same thing, but their voting record doesn't really prove that?
Well, you just said it. It's their voting record, right? The more that you can show the carved in stone, can't get away from it, this is truth, voting record, and you hold it up for people and you show them what the voting record is, the only thing that the incumbent can do is just kind of stammer about it. I was in a meeting where the challenger and the incumbent were at a forum together, and the incumbent had voted for something that was horrible. The challenger said, you voted for this. The incumbent said, no, I didn't. So the challenger said, hey, for all of you here, right after this meeting, I'm going to put their voting record on my social media pages for you to go look at. So the funny thing is that everybody went, okay. Well, then the incumbent, he went over to his legislative director after the meeting, and he walked over to her. And in a moment when the whole room went kind of dead silent by accident or by God, who knows, but he leaned over to his legislative director and said, did I really vote for that? And she said, yes, you did. And then the whole room went, okay, then. All right. Right. And to redefine them, you just have to prove what they've done. If they've done great, then terrific. Their voting record will show that. If they haven't and they voted for things that nobody should vote for, then that's on them.
Now, when you're dealing with an incumbent that's been in for more than 10 years, can you use a voting record that goes all the way back to, say, 2008, 2009?
You can, but you know what's interesting, and I can prove this through the data that I have. The longer, like for example, the freshmen who came into the Texas House of Representatives, the freshmen who came in voted for less spending significantly than people who'd been in office 10 or more years. By far, totally different. And so because of that, the longer that they're in the legislature, the more likely they are to be people like the legislature, right? So we become who we hang around. If you're hanging around the people of the district, you'll stay like your district. If you're hanging around the people in Austin, you'll hang around them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mitch Little said on last month's podcast that what you basically have in the House of 150 members is basically you got your far left and your far right, which are your fringes, and your far right wants to cut down the size of government spending. Yep. But the 100 people in the middle on both sides of the aisle are all spenders. They love to spend money.
Yeah, it's alarming how many times they just vote yes. Like they had 4,200 roughly record votes in the House. Ryan Guillen, who's down on the border, voted 99.9 or 99.6% of the time yes.
Wow.
And the only time that he really voted no was on amendments. The few bills where he voted against something, I think there were 6 bills that he voted no on. But sometimes he would vote yes first on the second reading and then no on the third reading, or vice versa. Todd Hunter does that a lot, where he votes, well, I say a lot, on the very few times, the small margin of times that he votes no on something, he first votes yes and then votes no, or votes no and then votes yes on second and third reading.
Wow. I mean, have they even read the bill, or is it just standard practice to vote yes?
Well, I'll tell you, so Ryan Guillen also, after every session, he parades around all the binders of bills that he passed. So if you're in the legislature and you think that this is something like a collegial atmosphere, and you walk over and you go, hey, I voted yes for all your bills, you're going to vote for my bill, right?
Right.
right? And because they're measuring themselves by how many votes, or I'm sorry, by how many bills they get passed. And unfortunately, we had people who look to them and say, well, they passed a lot of bills. They must be amazing. I'm sorry. How many of those shrunk government?
Yeah.
How many of those gave you your property taxes back, right? Not any of them, really. So, because if the government spends more, which it did, then it has to tax more to pay for it. That's just common sense.
Yeah, I know at Grassroots America, I've heard Joanne say before, the measure of success for a conservative Republican is like how many bills did they retract from previous sessions to shrink the government, not how many new bills they passed to build up the government,
Yeah, correct.
So let's talk about burning desire, chapter 11. You say your job, if you do it right, is to build in the voter not just the desire, but the burning desire to be part of the campaign. And you talk about in your book those people that will walk across broken glass for you. How do you build that burning desire in people to support a candidate?
So I have a slide in the seminar that says this is not about your election, it's about their freedom. The more that you make that distinction, that you're there to serve, right? Like Moses led them to the promised land, to the land of milk and honey. Did he get there? Nope. They did, but he didn't go through. And so your job is not to serve yourself. Your job is to serve other people. If we actually have servants who get into office to represent us, then that's the measure of it all, right? But when we hire an attorney in the place where they practice law, the person goes in there and he doesn't look at us and say, I don't need to know your story. I got this. You be quiet and just sit down and I'll represent you. That's ridiculous. We fire that attorney right away. But how many times do we have representatives look at us and say that they're going to do that in the place where they're representing us, in the place where they make law, right? Well, that's just dumb. So let's get rid of that idea.
Yeah, and why don't we fire these representatives that are not representing us because we're their employer? Why are we not firing them?
Well, again, firing them requires replacement, and replacement requires somebody who will prepare and get organized, which is the whole reason I wrote the book, is to start to get a number of people to understand better how politics work, how campaigns work, how getting people on your side works. So like Ron Paul, I give the example in the book, Ron Paul never had a volunteer organizer or a volunteer coordinator or anything for his campaign. That guy had people buying blimps for him, billboards for him. They'd hand paint yard signs. They'd do all kinds of crazy things to help that guy. They even tattooed his logo on their arm, right? So anyway, they threw themselves at his campaign. It wasn't because he was just an amazing guy. I suppose in his own right he was, but it was because of his message. It was because of what he was trying to do for the people. And to this day, people love Ron Paul and they follow Ron Paul and they want to do that. So I mentioned in the book that of the if I had to take a look over the last 25 years and pick 5 politicians who had the most influence on politics, he's one of them. And because people still today, I mean, we still hear end the Fed, or audit the Fed today, right? And the reason why is because of Ron Paul.
Yeah. I mean, you can also even say that about Bernie Sanders on the other side of the aisle. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But it's because he's promising to do something for them, right? They're not elevating themselves through it. And that's another thing too, is the candidates need to realize this isn't about your resume. It's about what you're going to do for the people. It's about the voter.
And how do you tap into that messaging or that fabric of the soul of the, mom and pop that is not like a hardcore voter, but, that message will reach them and they'll go vote because of your message? How do you tap into that emotion in people?
Well, understand first that people want to protect their families most of all, right? So during COVID, we saw all these families watch what was happening in this mobile school environment that we had because nobody could go to school anymore, right? And all of a sudden, these moms were paying attention to the curriculum and what they were being taught in schools, and they were alarmed. And they said, what is this? And so all of a sudden, the Moms for Liberty groups just went boop, and they just blew up overnight. There they were all over the place. In Midlothian, Texas, they went from nobody to learning that they just hired a DEI instructor over the summer to go, okay, forget that. And then they all of a sudden had 1,100 signatures in 3 weeks. Wow, that's an amazing amount of signatures in 3 weeks. The DEI instructor got fired. But the point is, people organize around things when they perceive that they're protecting their family, and especially when they're protecting their children. So the more that a campaign can align with that idea that letting the government spend money egregiously hurts your family, the more you can connect that to the protection of your children, the more likely you are to get people engaged.
So let's talk about an obstacle that a lot of these challenges are about to come up against in this cycle, which is the school choice bill that passed, which we could argue whether or not it really gave most Texas families real school choice. But now, on top of that, President Trump has endorsed all of the incumbents who voted for it because he said he would. You know, how do these challengers, first of all, do you think that the school choice bill really did resonate with voters, that it was a successful bill? And number two, how do the challengers overcome the Trump endorsement?
So I actually spend 5 slides in the seminar going over the school choice thing, right? But I present it from the perspective of the inarguable approach. I don't know if we're going to talk about that while we're on here.
That's next. That's next.
Okay, so this will be a great segue then. So the inarguable approach is something that I came up with to teach candidates who had forums that they had to go to. They were given 1 minute to answer complicated questions. And I had candidates call me up and go, I don't even know that I can repeat the question in a minute, much less answer it in a minute, right? So anyway, they would say, well, how do I do this? So I came up with this thing called the inarguable approach. And it's a very simple idea. The idea is that the first thing out of your mouth, most of the time for all of us, we give the conclusion of what we think, right? What do you think about taxes? We're taxed too much. That's a conclusion. But I don't give the person the opportunity to walk through my logic or my reasoning to get to the same place that I did. I just announce my conclusion and then they either agree or disagree. The better thing is to start out by saying something that nobody would argue with, right? So for taxes, we're taxed too much. Well, the thing to say there is that all of us, when we earn our money, we earn that money to go ahead and take care of our families. And when the government spends our money, the government only has one source of income, and that's us. So it has to take money away. So therefore, the government should spend as little as possible so that we can keep as much of our money as we can, right? That whole idea is pretty inarguable and certainly much better than, well, we're taxed too much. So if you give people the opportunity to understand how you got somewhere, and you do that in a short group of sentences, 3 sentences, that only takes 20 seconds to say. And in a 1 minute forum now, you can say all kinds of things in a minute. So anyway, that I teach. The school choice thing, getting back to that, the problem with school choice, and I'm just going to jump to the kind of conclusion of that. The problem with school choice is people were looking for, they're dissatisfied with the lack of proficiency in public schools, 30, 40, 50% for reading and math by the time that they get out of college, or by the time that they get out of high school. When they get to college, they have to take remedial classes because they're not performing, right? Anyway, that's unacceptable. Well, that's a proficiency problem, not a funding problem. So the whole school choice thing, as it was presented in Texas, was all about funding. They presented it as let the funding follow the student. But I know homeschool parents who homeschool their kids on $400 of books every year. That doesn't require thousands and thousands of dollars. That's just $400 in books. And so you don't have to spend an exorbitant amount of money. You just need to make sure that you're doing proficiency the right way. School choice, as it was presented in the legislature, doesn't even touch school proficiency or student proficiency. And that's the core problem, that we didn't solve that with this. And so we're going to have a lot of people who 3-4 years from now are going to say, oh, we have to take another whack at this because we didn't really solve the problem. Yeah. Plus, the school choice bill only, I think it goes after 100,000 students. Well, there's 4.6 million in Texas. What are we going to do with that, right? So again, we went after the wrong problem with the wrong thing. It's not the school choice as an idea is wrong. It's that going after the funding is completely wrong.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it really doesn't, like you said, it doesn't accomplish what they set out to do because the money doesn't really follow the child, for one thing. And number two, you know, it's like most Texas families will not even benefit from it. My other argument with school choice also is they're taking the $1 billion out of the surplus fund. But my argument always was, what happens when we run out of surplus? To which the lobbyists in Austin told me, because I talked to them during the session, they said, we're never going to not have a surplus in Texas ever. And I'm like, isn't that kind of Pollyanna to think that we're never not going to have a surplus? And once we don't have a surplus, how do we keep funding public schools plus the vouchers? That's my question.
Yeah, there's a really great book by a guy named Joseph Tainter called The Collapse of Complex Societies. And it's short, but he basically looked at 40 different civilizations that have tanked over all of the eons, right? And what he came to the conclusion of is that they all ran out of resources and couldn't sustain themselves. So therefore, they just kind of collapsed. Well, you know, you keep spending endlessly, you keep doing all this stuff, and one of these days, this isn't going to be sustainable. And we started noticing that when the inflation started hitting. You know, back when Rush Limbaugh was still alive, he kept saying, we keep spending a lot of money, but so far nobody's really hurting from it. Well, once inflation started putting $8, $9 a dozen eggs on sale, everybody went, wait a minute, right? And we all started seeing the impact of it. Now things are back down, and we can perhaps grow our way out of the debt problem. I don't know, but big government hurts us every time. And so if we don't solve that problem, then we're going to end up having more of that problem, and ultimately that is unsustainable.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that we just got the quarterly GDP report out, and for the first time we've had a surplus, 20-something billion dollars because of the tariffs. Now, I don't know that the tariffs are sustainable over a long period of time, but I will say this. I was reading in Epoch Times, and since Harry Truman, I think we've only had like maybe 5 cycles where we've actually had positive balanced budget and GDP. I mean, Trump really made history this last cycle with this whole $25 billion surplus.
Well, and what people don't realize too is that the tariffs weren't about taxing other nations. The tariffs were about resetting the trade structure that we have with those nations so that they're not putting their heavy tariffs on us, which they've been doing. Instead, it was to equalize it so that our markets are now open up to the world as opposed to shut down to the world because of the tariffs being put on our stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I do want to go back to the inarguable principle that you teach in chapter 12. Give us another example of an inarguable using the topic of abortion.
Sure. So abortion, whenever you ask a conservative, they're going to give you the conclusion. And one of the things that we need to be aware of is when the first thing out of our mouth is a conclusion. So if you ask a conservative, what do you think about abortion? They're going to say, well, it's murder. That's a conclusion, right? The only thing I can do with that is agree or disagree. But if you try to think of either a timeless principle that nobody can disagree with or an inarguable fact and start with that, well, the most inarguable thing I can think of when it comes to a woman being pregnant is that every woman who's pregnant speaks to the baby in her womb before the baby's born. And I don't care if I'm talking to the most ardent abortion lover person out there. Their mother spoke to them while they were in the womb, before they were born. Their mother's mother spoke to them while they were in the womb, right? So why did they do that? Because it's a baby. We don't talk to inanimate objects. Hi there, how are you? We don't do that. We talk to life, right? And so we talk to puppies. Why? Not because they understand us, but because they're alive, right? We talk to babies in the womb. Why? Because they're alive. So anyway, and then you follow up with what baby doesn't have a right to life? So if the inarguable statement for that, rather than abortion's murder, you say every woman talks to the baby in her womb before the baby's born. Why? Because it's a baby, and what baby doesn't have a right to life? That's a much more powerful argument when discussing abortion with people who don't agree with you than it is to just call it murder. And now you're leaving them to now think of something on the end of that. And that's really what it's about. Is the inarguable approach is to not only give a good answer, but it's also to allow people to see how you got to your logic on it. And even if they end up disagreeing with you, at least they can appreciate how you got there.
Yeah. And I like how you talk about in your book, practicing your inarguables, come up with your inarguables, your topics. And when you're driving from campaign event to campaign event or through the district and door knocking, practice in your car while you're driving to events, how you're going to answer those questions. I like how you put that in your book.
Yeah, thanks. On page 153 in the book, there's a whole bunch of inarguables. Or not inarguables, a whole bunch of issues. And so why not just pick one and while you're driving, practice that? Because whether you're a candidate or whether you're somebody who just wants to influence your neighbors and friends, that the more that you can have a really good articulate answer that makes them think or rethink their position on something, the better off you are.
Yeah, agreed. I really enjoyed your book, by the way. I highlighted so many parts of it. I want to end by talking about your last chapter in the back, obedience. You talk about, when God calls you to do this, it's not about winning or losing. It's about following in obedience what he asks you to do. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, because a lot of candidates who run for office, if they lose, and a lot of them do because they don't know what they're doing, they're novices with this. So anyway, they come up to me afterwards and they go, I'm really jaded now. I believe that God told me to do this, and then I lost. And I said, well, wait a second. So God told you to do this. You believe that? Yeah. Did you obey? Yeah. Well, then where's your disappointment? Because God isn't disappointed. You didn't let him down. You obeyed, right? I believe that too many times we set the expectation on ourselves, but we have to remember, though, that our job is to plant and water. Our job is not the increase, right? So nobody if they're farming, nobody goes out there and sticks a seed in the ground and waters it and then yells at the plant, grow, right? That doesn't work, right? God will bring the increase as God chooses to, and our job is just to obey and do that. If we do that and we take that approach where we obeyed and we understand that we obeyed, then it's a lot easier to just simply get out there and obey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really loved your book a lot. And I want to put up the website, thegoalistowin.com. Is that where people go to buy your book, or do they go to Amazon, or both?
Yeah, actually, so the physical copy of the book, if you want one, you can go ahead and get it. And then what I'll do is I'll sign it for you and give you my signature there. And then you can get the book that way and you get a physical copy. Or you can go to Amazon. You can get it from Amazon. It's $19.95 on the website there. It's $16.95 through Amazon. And one of these days, I'll finish doing the audio.
Oh, nice.
Create the audio book. So
that's great. That's awesome. Well, in the last segment here of our interview, I want to talk about the workshop that's coming up. This is going to be August 16th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. In Frisco, Texas at Kingdom Life Church. And so who is this workshop for, first of all? Who should attend this workshop?
Anybody who wants to make sure that we get the right people in office. It doesn't matter whether you're a candidate or whether you're a supporter. So yesterday I gave a workshop over in Rusk County, which is one county to the east of me here in Tyler, Texas. And 50 people showed up, and 12 of the people there were tied to a campaign. And so the lady who's running brought 12 of her people with. I met with her today for lunch, and I said, how was the seminar for everybody? And she goes, we're so excited. We're all on fire. We're ready to go. And she goes, what's more, having read your book and now attended the seminar, we can see how it all comes together. So like in Rockwall County, where last fall they bought 20 of my books, in January they had me show up for the seminar. In May, then when they had their municipal elections, the 4 candidates that they ran, all 4 of them won, and didn't just win, they all won by 20%. And in Texas, there was a bloodbath of conservative candidates in the municipal elections, except for one place, Rockwall County. And the nice thing about that is not only were they so excited to win, but they know now that they have the playbook to win, but now they're looking forward, and their ambition is from school board all the way to county judge. They want to make sure that Rockwall County in Texas has conservative, frugal Christian candidates top to bottom. And anyway, people who were thinking that maybe elections couldn't be done and couldn't be won are now coming to them, and they're calling themselves the cavalry.
I love it.
Right. I mean, it's inspiring to see them do this. So this is for everybody.
Is any campaign winnable?
Well, I would say, yeah. And part of the reason why is I think too often we think that money is the way through or whatever, but think about the people that you personally know. Like I don't know how many people you personally know, but there are a lot of people who look to you for guidance on so many things, right? If you tell them to vote for a certain person, they respect you and they understand your reputation and they esteem you. You could drop 1,000 mailers on the doors of the people that you just talked to. They could spend $1 billion. It doesn't make a difference. Jeb Bush, when he was running against Donald Trump in Iowa, Jeb spent a huge amount of money, like $2,800 per vote or something ridiculous like that. Trump spent like, I don't know, maybe 20. I mean, like it wasn't even close, right? And Jeb Bush finished in 6th place. So you can spend a ton of money. We psych ourselves out by looking at the wrong things.
Yeah.
The right thing to look at, like, for example, should America, with all of our novice warriors, should we have won against the most professional army ever, the British, to win our freedom? We shouldn't have, right? We have to stop defeating ourselves before we even get started. We have to instead embrace the idea that if we organize, if we prepare, if we go with God and we obey, what isn't possible?
Yeah, nothing. And I want to underscore what you're saying too about the power of the small donations, because I just had lunch with a freshman representative that won her race in the last cycle against an incumbent. And all of her support came from small-time donors. She didn't have any PACs. She had no money from Texans for Lawsuit Reform, Dick Weekly, Sands Pack Casino, Dade Phelan. She had none of that money working for her. It was just the mom and pop giving her 35, 40 bucks, and she beat the incumbent. It's all about the momentum. In your book, you talk about how big is your stream, how wide is your stream. And in our mind, we look at our campaign and everybody we're talking to is like, oh yeah, I'm voting for you. I'm voting for you. And you think you're doing a great job, but you talk about how in actuality, your stream's not wide enough to reach outside those parallels. What are you talking about in your book there?
Almost every candidate goes to the expected things, right? They go to the CEC meetings, where the local GOPs. They go to the Republican clubs. They go to the pachyderm meetings. They go to whatever. Anyway, and everywhere they go, these are all people who are very, very politically connected. But 95% of everybody, they don't float in those streams. They don't go to those places, right? So when you're hearing from all of these people who kind of do that and they're really hooked in, it's not hard to hear, I'm going to vote for you. I'm not going to vote for your opponent. Therefore, you have a misunderstanding of what's really going to happen on election day. Our job instead, though, is to connect with as many people as we can. So we all know 150 people by first name, friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, people we go to church with, businesses that we frequent, groups that we're a part of. If we just talk to people, use our big, beautiful mouth to go ahead and just talk to people and let them know, hey, you know what? So-and-so is running and they're going to be a great representative for us. Vote for them. Our trusted word of mouth has much more impact than we know. And because of that, then plus all of us who are politically connected, we all have people come up to us before a campaign and say, hey, what way should I vote? Right. And then people would tell us. So why not amplify that? And the more that we do that, then the better off we are. And I think that people, they just have to understand, again, if God's spoken to being everything that we have and we're children of God and we're made in God's image, how powerful is our mouth? Our job is just to use it. So let's use it.
Yeah, I agree. How important do you think closing the primary is going to be for our grassroots candidates in the next cycle?
It helps, but I don't care whether it's closed or open. I'm going to out-organize. Everything I do is all about organization, and so a lot of consultants are aerial, meaning that they fly overhead and they drop leaflets and mailers on the campaign. Right? That's nice. I'm very ground-oriented. I try to live with relationships, right? And try to connect to people and try to get as many people connected into the campaign as possible so that you can begin to move that out. If you've heard of 6 degrees of separation, which is where you can get from one part of the world to another by picking 2 people, and it takes 5.5 or 6 hops, hence 6 degrees of separation. In a county, what is that, 2 or 3 degrees of separation? So you're only 2 or 3 conversations away from getting the word out about a candidate. Oh my goodness, that's so easy, right? And what's more is if you talk, it doesn't cost the campaign a dime. So you don't have to spend a ton of money. All you got to do is just talk.
Agreed. And there's also a point of diminishing return where spending more money doesn't do anything for your campaign. These guys that raised $2 million, there comes a point where, sending the 12th mailer, the 13th mailer, the 14th mailer is having no effect on moving the needle. They've done research on this and studies have shown it doesn't even move the needle with the voter.
No, in fact, text messaging doesn't really move the needle. Robocalls don't move the needle. None of that stuff really moves the needle. Person-to-person relationships is what matter and what gets things done. And again, it's not hard. All we have to do is just talk to people.
Yeah, it's that old adage. It's not what you know, but it's who you know.
That's it. Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and put up the website for the workshop. If you go out to danielnation.com/events, you will see the August 16th workshop out there. The cost is $35. It includes lunch. It's from 10 to 2. Brett, what are people going to walk away with if they come to the workshop?
Wow. Well, so recently I did my first workshop outside of Texas, and I've done over 30 of these now throughout, Texas. And anyway, I went up to Tennessee. They don't have any idea who I am in Tennessee, right? They've never met me before. But before I even got out the door, they were already saying, we need you back. And just today, I got the call from Richard Archie up there in Tennessee, who said that they're booking me back and I'm going to go and talk to them again on September 6th, right? The reason is because they're tired of not winning races. They want to know what the plan is. And everything I teach, you don't have to leave the house to go ahead and win the election. You can stay right at home. And I'm not saying that you can't block walk, you should block walk, but I'm saying that the things that I teach people, anybody can do. And so when people walk out, they go, oh my gosh, This is actually practical and it's doable. And it's got a history of success, and we can do this. And so people walk out enthusiastic and excited, and they believe that suddenly they can rein in this big, powerful, terrible government that's, been hurting them and their families.
Yeah, that's what I love about your book is it's the nuts and bolts. I mean, you give the working infrastructure for how to put an actual campaign together. Just to give a couple of topics that we are going to talk about in the workshop. We're going to learn how to attract voters. We're going to learn how to multiply our vote. We're going to learn how to find and fund the challengers. We're going to learn about marketing and organization. We're going to learn about reaching others like ourselves who want to be reached with our message. We're going to learn about the inarguables and effectively arguing your points on any issue. And then we're going to learn about contrasting your opponent. And then finally, let's talk about Teflon in your network. You have a chapter about having a Teflon network. What are you talking about with a Teflon network?
So, most opponents want to pretend you don't exist when you're running for office, right? Because if they mention you, you're suddenly their equal, right? So they want to pretend you don't exist. They want to make that. But the moment, though, that you wind up getting close in the polling, or they think you have too much traction, you're getting too much attention, now they'll mention you and they'll start putting you down and everything. The way to be Teflon, there's a few things you can do. First of all, once you're accused of something, remember, it's not about you. You could come and you could say, Brett Rogers kicks his dog every night. You could lie about me, right? And I could say, but I don't even have a dog, right? And so anyway, but now I'm talking about what they're talking about. Nobody cares about that. Instead, you always go back to what the voter wants. So that's what Trump did. When Trump was accused of grabbing women in a certain way, he didn't talk about that at all. He said, listen, I'm here to make America great again. And that's why I'm here. That's the agenda of the voters. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. I'm talking about what the voters are talking about. And if you're attacking me, you're attacking the voters. So he rejected the premise of what it was that they were saying. Your Teflon in your campaign, if you have inarguables, that's your impenetrable shield. You're also going to be Teflon if you're moving together as a unit and you're responding to the opposition in a unified way. You're going to be Teflon if you're working with the people with the trusted word of mouth that you do with all the people that you know. So all of these things kind of work together so that all that stuff just bounces off of you and it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Now, I know that voters don't like to see the candidates attacking each other, and that's why PACs exist. But you do talk about in your book about how you do have to speak the truth, and especially when it comes to voting records. So where's the balance? Where's the fine line of contrasting yourself with the opponent without personally attacking all the time? How do you balance that?
Well, first of all, it's not a personal attack to talk about the bad things that they've done that hurt the people, right? And so that's okay. I never go in, like I always tell my candidates, don't go after their personal life, no matter how bad it is. There's no up there. Other people might talk about that. You as a candidate don't talk about that. But if you just stick to their voting record and talk about how that voting record hurt the people, like for example, John Cornyn here in Texas, some people don't know that back when Ted Cruz was fighting to defund Obamacare, John Cornyn 30 days later voted with the Democrats for cloture, which made it easier for the Democrats to fund Obamacare, and that's what they did. So where Ted Cruz was fighting to defund Obamacare, John Cornyn allowed the Democrats to fund Obamacare and have it continue. And so that hurts our families. So when that happens and we learn this about somebody, our job is to simply say, gosh, if they're hurting my family, I've got to get rid of them. So we need to make sure that that's there. It's safe for you to say that in a campaign and talk about the truth of that. But I would always tell my candidates, talk twice as much about your land and milk and honey than you talk about the opponent and anything that they've done, because you want to stay attractive to people while still telling the truth.
Yeah. How do you know whenever you've reached that critical mass point where you really are underneath your opponent's skin, besides them just mentioning you by name? What are some of the signs or characteristics of how they're going to behave that says I'm over the target?
Well, they're going to call you names. I have one thing that I talk about where there's a magic act by Penn and Teller where they tell you not to keep your eye off of this thing that they're pointing to on stage, and then a gorilla with cymbals comes out and starts crashing the cymbals and jumping all over. Anytime that the opponent looks like that, you're hitting the target.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, they just kind of start to come off the rails, right?
Well, and they start lying. And, in campaigns, we hear that politicians lie. We're numb to that anymore. So I don't do that anymore. Instead, if an opponent who professes to be Christian is telling a lie about their challenger, right? Then isn't that a 10th commandment thing? Isn't that bearing false witness against your neighbor? And if you're such a Christian, don't the 10 commandments matter to you? And why would you do that? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Reframe the argument so that people hear it in a different way, so that then they go, oh, he's not just lying. He's breaking the 10 commandments here. Whoa, wait a minute. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes people stop and say, what, wait a second. Brett, we really appreciate having you on our podcast tonight. We can't wait to have you in Frisco next month. Guys, once again, the website address is out there, danielnation.com/events. You can pay for the workshop right through the website. $35 covers the cost of lunch. And you will have the nuts and bolts of putting a working campaign together when we're done. And if you're a grassroots activist like myself, or a precinct chair, or you're involved in another way, the information that you're going to get is going to help any challenger that you want to support in the primary. It's going to help you with their campaign, whether you're block walking, poll greeting, doing phone calls for them, or whatever you're doing. It's going to help you with knowledge for getting that candidate across the finish line. So, Brett, any parting thoughts that you'd like to give us?
I just want to say, I recently met you for the first time and had the opportunity to hear you speak. Your dynamic, just absolutely unabashed love for the Lord, and the way that you present that, I'm looking forward to in a great way to being there with you and your people. And I can't wait to do this. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brett. You're a blessing to us as well. And thank you guys all so much for tuning in to the Daniel Report tonight. God bless you. And we hope to see you at the workshop in August. Everyone have a good night. Bye-bye.